Hello, dear listener of the Maternal Feminist podcast. The following is a recording of my introductory speech at the recent book launch of Australian Mothering: Historical and Sociological Perspectives that I co-edited with Dr. Carla Pascoe and published by Palgrave Macmillan in 2019. The launch was hosted by the School of Historical and Philosophical Studies at the University of Melbourne and was launched by Associate Professor Elizabeth Hill from the University of Sydney. The launch was via a Zoom webinar on the 8th of September 2020, and the following is an audio recording of my introductory speech. Each author in the book introduced their chapter by reading their abstract and talking a little bit about what the chapter was about. Carla emceed on the night, and we both introduced the volume.
Australia has had a lively academic community devoted to research on motherhood in the humanities and social sciences for 40 years, and explicitly, that is, with this explicit research agenda, for about 20 years. Following on from Professor Andrea O'Reilly's establishment of the then named Association for Research on Mothering in Toronto, Canada in 1998, and its instantiation in Australia, first as ARM-A and then as A-Mercy. We have had an active research community with biennial conferences, seminars and other activities since 2002. This has provided a scholarly home for many, including young women coming through the conventional academic pipeline and also women who had left education and paid work to raise children and then returned wanting to analyse this deeply meaningful experience. It also included those of us in the unbalancing act, as I like to think of it, of combining paid work and mothering. A-Mercy certainly provided a sense of academic community for me, and to this end I'd like to thank in particular my colleague and friend Professor Andrea O'Reilly, and from the conference scene in the early 2000s also my dear friend Fiona Giles, Alison Bartlett, Denise Ferris, Marie Porter, Julie Kelso and Joan Garvin. More recently, and in the current incarnation of A-Mercy, I'd like to acknowledge the hard work and warm collegiality of Sophia Brock, Caitlin Still, Anna Kerr and all those on the committee. The Maternal Scholars Reading Group in Melbourne has also been an important source of intellectual camaraderie, and as Carla said, where we both met and where this collaboration began. Now, I'm looping back earlier, much earlier in the 20th century. Marilyn Lake's and Alison McKinnon's research in this volume similarly shows a vibrant community of suffragists, scholars, and the first generation of women in the professions and in politics who took seriously the situation of mothers. They were concerned with both enforced motherhood, or the question of contraception and family planning, and mothers' economic dependence on marriage. This maternal feminism was oriented both to the liberation of women from patriarchal strictures, while also being keenly aware of women's distinct contributions to the polity as wives and mothers, and more personally encapsulated their own desires to combine, in Olive Schreiner's words, love and freedom. Poignant words which became the title of Alison McKinnon's brilliant book. Lake's and McKinnon's research in this volume and in their books shows in different ways the first wave feminists were deeply concerned about how to reconcile love and freedom. Julie Stevens's research on second wave feminism and the construction of memories of both our feminist foremothers and our own mothers again shows that maternal feminism was also a part of the second wave, even if it is rarely remembered as such, and also existed in tension with calls for women's liberation and sloshing off the shackles of traditional wife and motherhood. What is interesting is that in prevailing narratives of both the first and the second waves of feminism in Australia, as elsewhere, we have forgotten that motherhood was central, even as it presented specific political and personal challenges. Kerrine Reiger has also referred to the struggle for birthrights in Australia as, quote, the forgotten women's movement. And Anne Mann's defining work in the mid-2000s showed the ongoing tensions between love and freedom in feminism as it came to embrace neoliberalism. What happened to the maternal in feminism? I think Julie's work is brilliant in helping to make sense of this potent forgetting. I'd like to pick up on this tension between love and freedom, or what is sometimes referred to more theoretically as difference and equality, and the complex antinomy between them. As I argue in my book, Modern Motherhood, and to an extent in my chapter in this book, the sequestered mother and the individualised woman are both artefacts of modernity. They were both produced in the same historical groundswell of the Enlightenment and imported to these shores alongside the botanical samples, convict labour and colonial impulse of conquest. The individualised woman and the sequestered mother are not separable entities, but flip sides of the same coin, mutually constitutive, even as the social structure creates problems for women who attempt to inhabit both of these personae simultaneously. Because of the separation of spheres and the underlying philosophy of liberalism, we often understand them as distinct, and so we have conventionally conceived of mothers or maternal women, rightly or wrongly, as the antithesis of liberated women, and certainly of those bad old feminists. Free individuals were conceptualised in classical liberalism as abstract, interchangeable and male. Women were understood paradoxically as both left behind in the state of nature and conversely as civil property, that is, as men's property. Conceiving women as free and autonomous therefore necessarily involved a rejection of the two institutions that defined them as subordinate, marriage and motherhood. Herein the antinomy of love and freedom emerged. Women wanted to be part of this universalist abstract human community and therefore to partake in liberty and equality. On the other hand, women wanted to be acknowledged for their distinctive capacities and unique contributions to the polity. This is what the political philosopher Carol Pateman identifies as, quote, Wollstonecraft's dilemma. It is the simultaneous and contradictory demand to be recognised as both equal and different. Women's exclusion from politics, the market and civil society was integral to the formation of Western modernity, which was why the rejection of motherhood was integral to feminist politics. It was never that women didn't want to reconcile love and freedom. It was that freedom was the proper basis for love, including the love of men and children, and that this in turn could reshape the body politic. The utopian feminist hope was that free women would make different and ideally better kinds of mothers. Those who wanted the children they had fewer children and were able to earn incomes or receive government payments to negotiate a modicum of decision-making power in marriage. This had also to mean, for some women, the right not to love men or have children. This antinomy between love and freedom still exists. However, it has been overlaid with a more recent problem that we might call the problem of having it all, and in turn the mandatory demand of doing it all. This I refer to in my chapter in this volume as Gillard's dilemma. In an update on Pateman's Wollstonecraft's dilemma, or the reconciliation of love and freedom, has emerged the dual demands to be economically self-sufficient and somehow magically an ever-present intensive mother. And we see this, of course, exacerbated under COVID. Under the heartless doctrine of neoliberalism, mothering and the domestic economy have been rendered both worthless and invisible. Instead, women are called to jump into waged labour with gusto as the apparent definition of freedom, without recognition of the invisible domestic economy. Maternal feminism has never been more important, and in some ways this volume is a restoration of the mother and maternalism to its proper place in Australian feminism. Maternal feminism has a history and a sociology in Australia. The mother has always been there. This volume is simply the act of remembering it. Returning to the everyday and the prosaic, this book is for me dedicated to my mother, Jennifer Bueskens, who did a wonderful job of mothering me and has helped with caring for my own children while I have studied and worked. My mum reconciled love and freedom as both a present and joyous mother and as a teacher in the public world. And this has given me a powerful model for how to do so in my own life. I would also like to thank Nick Wong, who has, as always, helped to make it possible for me to write and indeed to be, and my children, Mia Bueskens, my adult daughter, Sophia and Tom. I would also like to thank Sarah Hewitt, Janet Fraser, Kim Toffoletti, Anne Mann and Julie Stevens for deep friendship and support. And finally, to thank all the authors of this book who helped to make it such a wonderful volume, and for everyone who came.